Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I think my voice is better, don't you? I went and got my respirator and did all that kind of stuff, kind of cleared it out a little bit, hopefully. Anyway, so going to continue our examination of Sukkot, Feast of Harvest, in other words, the end of the age, the parousia, the judgment, the resurrection. All of those issues are interrelated with one another. And the Bible teaches that the charismatic gifts were to end at that harvest time, at that end of the age. We would express it at the day of the Lord, as has been historically and traditionally taught by the charismatic movement. Now, yesterday I shared with you how Daniel chapter 9 is an extremely powerful text to prove that the charismatic gifts have ended. Daniel was told 70 weeks are determined to seal vision and prophecy. Well, as I shared with you yesterday, to seal vision and prophecy meant to put an end to the prophetic office through the cessation or through the fulfillment of all prophecy, thus no need for the prophetic office. I mean, if all prophecy has been fulfilled, you don't need any further prophecy. Now, I said that in my book here, Seal Up Vision and Prophecy, I document this. I'm only going to read a couple quotes here from scholarship to drive this point home. Quote, prophecies and prophets are sealed by the full realization of all prophecies. Prophecy ceases, no more prophets anymore appear. Number two, quote, the impression of translators being that all visions and prophecies were to receive completed fulfillment in the course of the 70 weeks. It appears to be more agreeable to the context to suppose that the prophet is speaking of the absolute cessation of all prophecy. Number three, the vision and the prophet would be sealed, that is, accredited, because their final accomplishment has been reached in those events of blessings for God's earthly people. And I give full documentation in the book. This book, as well as this book, go into detail about the time of the fulfillment of all prophecy. So, as I promised yesterday, the question is, and let's rehearse very quickly. Point number one, 70 weeks are determined to seal vision and prophecy, to bring all prophecy to its completion, to its fulfillment, and the cessation of the prophetic office. When would that be? Or what was included in that? During the same time period, 70 weeks are determined, it would bring in everlasting righteousness. So you have the end of prophecy, the bringing in of everlasting righteousness within the same identical time period, the 70 weeks. Now, look, I know there's a lot of controversy about when the 70 weeks was going to end. It's very popular in some circles, post-millennial circles, to say, and this is Kenneth Gentry's view, to say, well, the 70 weeks ended in approximately 34-35 AD with the stoning of Stephen. Well, I'm sorry, that won't work. To seal vision and prophecy doesn't mean to fulfill one single prophecy, i.e., the death of Christ on the cross, as Gentry tries to argue. No. Daniel is told very specifically 70 weeks are determined to seal vision comprehensively and prophet. Not the vision and not the prophet. It is all vision and all prophecy. Well, unless you want to argue that all vision and all prophets were fulfilled by AD 34-35, then you can't have the 70 weeks ending at the stoning of Stephen. Not only that, 70 weeks were determined to bring in everlasting righteousness. Now, it's absolutely certainly true that Jesus Christ is our righteousness, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 30 and 31. But while that, allow me to use the term, while that process of establishing the world of everlasting righteousness began with the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, no doubt whatsoever, Paul in Galatians chapter 5, verse 5, said, we, through the Spirit, see, that's through the prophetic office, eagerly await, he uses the Greek word apekdekomai, which means to eagerly expect the hope of everlasting righteousness. Well, let me ask you a question. Since Paul said in Romans chapter 8, we do not hope for that which is seen, but which is unseen. So if everlasting righteousness had already been brought in, then how could Paul say, we, through the Spirit, eagerly await the hope, that which it was still a hope in AD 49 or 50, wherever you want to date Galatians. We eagerly hope for everlasting righteousness. Now, since Daniel foretold the establishment of everlasting righteousness within the 70 weeks, and since Paul was still looking for the fulfillment of the hope of righteousness, then that's pretty evident that the 70 weeks were not fulfilled in AD 34-35. Not only that, Peter in 2 Peter chapter 3, who is anticipating the fulfillment of the Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Now, let me divert for just a moment here, all right? To point out something that I observed in our very beginning study of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and that which is perfect and the face-to-face. I stated, whatever that is, no matter how you define that which is perfect, no matter how you define the face-to-face, it would be the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Why? Because Paul said that his entire gospel, his eschatology, was nothing but the hope of Israel found in Moses, the law, and the prophets. Now, if Paul said that his eschatology was nothing but the hope of Israel found in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, then unless that which is perfect, and unless the face-to-face has nothing to do with eschatology, then that means that the arrival of the face-to-face, the arrival of that which is perfect, is eschatological, and therefore is part and parcel of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. And here's what that means. If you put the arrival of that which is perfect, if you posit the arrival of the face-to-face, the face-to-face state off in some indeterminate future from us today, that means that you are saying that God's old covenant with Old Covenant Israel remains valid, every jot and every tittle of it. Because if the face-to-face, and if that which is perfect is part of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel, then you cannot have the end of Torah, you cannot have the end of the old law in the past, and that's the cessation of miracles, at all. And then turn around and say, oh, well, yeah, we're still looking for that which is perfect. Makes no sense whatsoever. It is irrational, it is illogical, and it's unscriptural. Wherever you posit the arrival of that which is perfect, and the face-to-face. It is there and then that God's old covenant promises made to old covenant Israel would be ultimately and finally fulfilled. That's why it's so important for me to point out that in 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter is very clear in saying, the second epistle I'm now writing unto you, brethren, in both of which to stir up your minds by holy minds by way of remembrance, that you would remember the words of the prophets who have spoken beforehand, the words of the prophets, and the words of Jesus's apostles and prophets. Remembering this, the scoffers would come in the last days. By the way, where's the Old Testament prophecy of the coming of scoffers? Isaiah 28. So Peter is predicting the fulfillment of Isaiah 28, which is an old covenant promise made to old covenant Israel. Anyway, so what was Peter looking for? In verse 10 and following, Peter describes the day of the Lord, in which he says, quote, the earth and the elements that are therein shall be burned up. And then in verse 13, he says, seeing that all of these things shall be dissolved, what manner of men ought we to be? Why? Because they were looking for the new heaven and the new earth, wherein dwells righteousness. And that would be according to his promise. Where did God promise the bringing in of everlasting righteousness? Oh, Daniel 9. When would everlasting righteousness be brought in? Within the 70 weeks of Daniel. Here's Peter writing well after AD 34-35, and he is looking for the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophets who promised the arrival of the new heaven and the new earth. Well, wait a minute. What Old Testament prophecies foretold the arrival of new heaven and new earth? Isaiah 65, Isaiah 66. They do so emphatically and explicitly. So once again, we have Peter reminding us he is looking for the fulfillment of God's old covenant promises made to old covenant Israel. And that promise of the new heaven and new earth is the promise of the bringing in of everlasting righteousness according to his promise. Folks, do you catch the power of what I'm sharing here? Daniel 9. 70 weeks are determined to seal vision and prophecy, to bring all prophecy to its end through fulfillment. 70 weeks were determined to bring in everlasting righteousness. You cannot have the cessation of prophecy divorced from the time of the bringing in of everlasting righteousness. Now, once again, what is the bringing in of everlasting righteousness of 2 Peter 3? Oh, it would be at the day of the Lord. Thus confirming, ironically enough, the charismatic doctrine that the miraculous gifts, the miraculous offices would end at the day of the Lord, the time of the arrival of everlasting righteousness in the new heaven and new earth. The problem for the charismatic movement is they put that off in our future. And oh, by the way, amillennialists put the arrival of the new heaven and new earth in our future. Postmillennialists put the arrival of the new heaven and new earth at the end of the Christian age, at the destruction of the old heaven and the old earth. Now that means, ladies and gentlemen, that unless you can prove that Peter was anticipating a different new heaven and new earth wherein dwells righteousness, from that foretold by Isaiah 65 and 66, and a different arrival of a different everlasting righteousness from that foretold by Daniel chapter 9, unless you can prove that Daniel 9, Isaiah 65, 66, all foretold something totally radically different from what Peter was anticipating in fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, then that means that the bringing in of everlasting righteousness in the new heaven and the new earth at the day of the Lord, and thus at the end of the prophetic office, the end of the miracles, was to be at the end of the 70 weeks. Well, guess what? Amillennialists don't believe the end of the 70 weeks is future. Postmillennialists do not believe the end of the 70 weeks is yet future. Premillennialists do, or dispensationalists do. Not all premillennialists do. Folks, you see the problem? The futurist view is completely, totally confused and confusing in regard to the doctrine of the end of the miraculous. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to conflate this and demonstrate this even from the book of Revelation. Now, in the meantime, do yourself a favor, go to my website and order these two books. 70 weeks are determined for the resurrection. That's the everlasting world of righteousness of 2 Peter 3 and Revelation 21 and 22, and seal up vision and prophecy. If you order both at the same time, I'll refund your shipping. I can't refund shipping if you order just one of them separately and distinct. But if you order both books, send me a note that says, hey, Don, I saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. Okay, tomorrow, I'm going to show you from Revelation how it agrees perfectly with Daniel chapter 9, that the gifts were to cease, the prophetic office was to cease at the end of the 70 weeks at the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. I'll see you there.